like to thank you all for being here today, for taking the time for being here with us. As you know, my name is Lisa, and I'm the Community Development Fellow as part of Project Rising Tide. Once again, Project Rising Tide is a state initiative that works with communities that have a lot of potential for development like yours. This meeting is actually, or Joe being here with us today, is a continuation of an event that we held in February, the Economic Development Summit, in which we had, the whole community come in, talk to us about the needs, strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for the city of Manistee. And then today we're just going to, present to you how do we use your feedback in combination, with interviews with the largest employers, with the manufacturers, with the community, with the community lead organizations, and just the demographics and statistics of Manistee. Project Rising Tide has 4 initiatives in this community. One is economic development. The other one is housing development. The third one is branding and marketing. How do we brand Manistee differently to attract more people into our community? And then the fourth one is good governance for the community leaders and organizations that steer our community. Joe Borstrom is our consultant as part as Place and Main Advisors. He has vast experience in economic development. He's worked with the MEDC and the Community Assistance Team since it started. He's actually just celebrated 3 years of going rogue and an independent consultant, and also does numerous presentations across the state of Michigan, and it's a certified trainer for the Redevelopment Ready Communities program as part of the state of Michigan as well. This has been an awesome process. This is my 7th month in the community. I should be here until the end of this year, but I'm really pleased and happy to be able to present this to you all, and hopefully this will be the gateway to get things moving forward in Manistee. All of your community leaders have done a great job of participating with us and meeting with us monthly and kind of help us get the ball rolling. So without further ado, I'll leave it to Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. As Lizette introduced me, my name is Joe Borstrom. I'm a principal at Place and Main Advisors. Typically, when I do presentations, I like to kind of wander around a little bit. But I've realized as we started doing more and more of these economic development strategies, one of the things that I like to do for the sake of transparency is when we do an unveiling, I'm going to show you the actual document today. We're not going to go through a ton of PowerPoints. We're going to literally kind of go page by page, and I'm going to read you every single word. We've got 3 hours set aside for this. Okay, well, we should be done about, my guess, half hour, 45 minutes, and we'll open up for a couple of questions afterwards. I will tell you that I thoroughly enjoyed working here in Manistee. We started out in January. Those of you who, how many folks attended the public meeting that we did at the theater? Thank you guys, because I've been rescheduled at least once or twice. So it was probably the most brutal January, February that we've had as native Michiganders. It's probably one of the most brutal winters that we've had in a long time. It's so nice to actually, nobody's complaining about the heat now, right? This is fantastic. But it's been a really nice time here in Manistee. I've been familiar with your community for quite a long time. Actually, it was when you were part of the Michigan Main Street program. I oversaw the Michigan Main Street program, so I've been here over the last probably 10 years. My wife is from Ludington, which I told I'm not supposed to mention because of the rivalry between Manistee and Ludington. But very familiar with the area, and have always been a big fan of your community, so I'm thrilled to be here to work with you guys on economic development. So this is the cover. I'm going to zoom in on this because it's going to get the print might be a little small, so I'm going to make sure folks can see it. The Rising Tide Initiative, I know Lizette had already talked about, but we were the firm that was contracted from that. So what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to give you a little bit of overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about data. I don't want to go a ton into data, mainly because I want to try to keep everybody awake. We're going to talk a little bit about the process and kind of how we went about this. We're going to talk a little bit about your local and regional goals as defined by your community, and then the economic development strategy itself. So without much ado, let's go forward with this. First of all, I got to tell you, this is one of the best pictures I've ever taken in my life. The fact, I will tell you too, just as an aside, what your community has been able to accomplish by revitalizing the Vogue Theater is beyond just putting a theater in your downtown. You have done a Herculean effort. I remember when you guys were in the Michigan Main Street program, this project went underway. I remember thinking, ooh, good luck. That's going to be a heavy lift. If you can do that, you can do anything. And it turns out you did it. And it's a tremendous asset. We were really thrilled to do the public participation in this particular space. It was the first public participation that we've ever done when there was popcorn, which incidentally and definitely connected. About a month and a half ago, we did one in Rogers City. Guess where we did ours? In the theater in downtown Rogers City, and they did popcorn and everything else. So you guys are trendsetters in that way as well. But it is a tremendous asset. It's a great anchor for your community, especially in the downtown. So I want to talk a little bit about what economic development is and how we viewed it going into the strategy. Typically, when we say economic development, people have a tendency to think about manufacturers, and rightfully so. And for the last, 50 years or so, economic development has been primarily focused on how do we attract manufacturing. But about 20 years ago, the industry started to significantly change. And what I mean by that is it went from a period where during the 50s and 60s and 70s, when we did economic development as an industry, our focus was on attracting plants. And those plants would then attract people. It's pretty much how Michigan was built. When we think about especially the east side of the state, and how we get a lot of people who moved up from Tennessee and Georgia and down south, and they came to work in the plants. Well, 20 years ago, so as manufacturing started, as we saw more and more efficiencies in manufacturing and less reliance on human capital on that, in those industries, we started to see a change especially when it came to tech, when it comes to other types of businesses. They weren't locating out in the middle of nowhere and hoping people were going to move there. What we started to see was a major shift that companies were going where they could find the talent. So they were looking for people first, before they started looking at cheap land. So we saw this whole shift where it was all about cheap land. If we could just give GM a cheap 1,000 acres, they put a big plant. There are very few of those plants that happen. As a matter of fact, I want to say the IEDC, the International Economic Development Corporation, pegs about 5 projects a year that have 200 employees or more anymore. That's it. There are thousands of communities all over the country. We're all competing for these 5 projects. Now, some of them are big. We've heard about Amazon. We've heard about Foxconn. We've heard about a lot of these different projects. The big part of those, though, when you look especially at Amazon, their number one criteria was accessibility to talent. So they wanted people to have people. So that becomes a major issue. So when we look at economic development now, in 2019, there's really 5 parts of economic development. So there's that traditional industry part. That's always going to be part of economic development. But talent now is a big piece of this. So it's workforce development, it's talent attraction, just having a workforce here that companies can use. Tourism is a big part of that. It's obviously a big piece here in Manistee. Anything that brings money from the outside of your community into your community is typically economic development. That's one way to think of it. Entrepreneurialism is a big piece of economic development. So this idea around growing our own. The reason why Nike is in Washington is because that's where Phil Knight lived. He's a huge University of Oregon fan. That's where he wanted to live. That's why Nike's headquartered there. Why is Ford in Dearborn? Why is their headquarters in Dearborn? That's where Henry Ford lived. I mean, it wasn't because it's not a whole lot about attraction. A lot of this is about entrepreneurship, about how do we help local residents increase their own wealth, and doing business ownership is a big piece of that. The last piece of this, and this has been fairly recent, probably the last 10 years it's become more recognized, is the role that place plays. So place means any of those places that we gather, so downtowns are a big part of place. Waterfront, parks, all those things play a role in economic development because they help us attract and retain talent within our community. So they all become kind of connected when we talk about economic development. So as we looked at Manistee, we wanted to look through these 5 lenses, and we'll talk about that here more in just a second. A little bit about your community. I'm sure everyone here knows you guys have air, you have rail relatively close. It turns out you have a little bit of water, which is great because they quit making that a long time ago. But really your strategic advantage, what I really wanted to specify, especially on this page, is your strategic advantage. Your strategic advantage, you don't have an interstate. You've got US 31s, essentially a 2-lane, maybe 3 or 4 lanes depending on the passing lanes south. And going up to Traverse City, it's still pretty much 2, 3, 4 lanes on passing lane areas. But your strategic advantage is your quality of life. You have an incredible community in which to live, and you have a very low cost of living to go with it. So that makes it attractive to talent. And so especially young talent who may not be making a ton of money, they may have a significant amount of student loan debt, as we're seeing with a lot of millennials and Gen Zs. But this idea that you guys have a very nice quality of life, and you have a very low cost of living. And that combines makes it very attractive. Now, your retirees have already figured that out. That this is the reason why I think you have a higher than average average age. But this idea that that's a competitive advantage too as you look at attracting talent. I want to talk a little bit about that average age. As you can see up here on the right-hand side, I'll blow it up a little bit. So the average age in the city of Manistee is 44.9 years old. Manistee County is slightly older at 49.3 years old. The Michigan average is 40.2 and the US average is 38. So you're above US average, you're above Michigan average. But the nice thing about the city itself is that you're fairly close to the state average. And for a northern Michigan community, all of our northern Michigan communities have a tendency to skew older because we have a lot of retirees that are up here. My folks live in Houghton Lake. Same thing happens. Everything north of 10, essentially. You start to see a skewing of older. But that's to say, though, you don't have young people. I think you do have a fair number of young people, but this idea that you guys skew just a little bit older, but not too much older, which is nice. One of the things that we're going to talk a lot about is population. This is the really nice news. The really nice news is that when we look at the city, the county, the state, and the country, all of those numbers are positive. For the last 20 years, it has not been. Matter of fact, for the last 20 years, you have lost a significant number of people in Manistee, specifically. The county has grown slightly, but the city itself has decreased. That's due to a couple of different factors. I believe, first and foremost, we saw that period of flight from 2006 to 2012, where our state economy especially was in the tank, and we saw people leaving. The other aspect that, as we see here, as I mentioned, your competitive advantage is also a little bit of a hindrance, is that your cost of living is low. So you're seeing a lot of second homeowners. You're seeing folks who are buying investment properties and using Airbnb or some other, temporary stay type of mechanism to be able to turn those houses from full-time residencies into essentially vacation homes. I'm not vilifying that necessarily, but I'm saying this is the impact at which we see. The reason that this is an issue from an economic development perspective is everything is driven off of census numbers. So, the 2000 census, 2010 census, and the upcoming 2020 census are critically important when we're evaluating communities when it comes to businesses. So this has an impact. The number of residents that directly show up in the census information has a direct impact on your ability to attract business, because that will give you an idea in terms of what the average household income is. It gives you the number of rooftops, so that gives you a number of all those things. So if you're a prospective business, the population is really important, and so is the average income. Looking at this is a little bit better chart in terms of where your age sits here. Where your median age is 44.9, but you can easily see that those top three brackets kind of dominate the number of folks who are here. But you've got the number of brackets below that are significant, but you can see the drop off here. So the concern is at some point, all these folks, there's not a whole lot of 85, 90, 100 plus brackets as you go farther up in this. So the issue becomes is what happens when this 55 to 64, what happens 10 years from now, 20 years from now? If these are secondary homeowners or folks who have retired here, what we're also seeing in some of the northern Michigan communities is those folks who retired in northern Michigan, as they become older, move back downstate because it's closer to family where they need help because of health issues. So it's going to be something that you have to think about because of the average age being a little bit higher, that this is just going to be a naturally occurring thing. But as you want to really beef up these lower brackets as much as possible to be able to go up to that. And now, looking at your even lower numbers that we've heard from the school system, that we're seeing declining numbers again. We're seeing declining numbers across the country. I think there's a real lack of recognition of where we are as a country in terms of our households with children. I don't want to go on a huge tangent about this, but if I were to ask the room, what do you think the average percentage of households without children is in the United States? Actually, let's say Michigan, because the numbers are really close to within 2 or 3%, 0.1% of each other. What's the percentage do people think of households without children in Michigan today? Anybody have a guess? 50? I love that answer because every room I give, somebody gives that number, 50%. It has not been 50% since 1960. It is currently 70%. So, and that's a 40 or 50 year trend. That's a blip. That's not a blip. That is a trend. We're seeing that trend go really down. It's supposed to bottom out about 72% in the next couple of years, and then probably come up just a little bit, but it's going to hover right around that because we're just seeing You know, the number of families who have, if anybody know families who had 5, 10 kids? How many folks know people with 5 or 10 kids today of that age? Not many. So we're just seeing less and less kids, less and less people having kids. So that's having an impact on all of this stuff. And this is really important when we talk about Manistee, and I'll get to that as your number one issue here in a minute. I want to talk a little bit about household income. Household income within the city is a little bit lower than it is with the county, which is still significantly lower than the state average. Of course, even lower than the national average. Now, this has a couple of factors. Having a high number of retirees will do that because it's a limited income, and if you're looking at, you know, these are folks who are, you know, all that passive income that they're getting, either through investments and or Social Security, that's a much lower bracket, and that's normal because that happens with retirees. They've paid off their homes, they've got, you know, a lot of equity, but that higher retiree number drops your average home rate. And that makes it a little bit more difficult when looking at retail as an example of having those lower the lower household income number. Here's how that breaks it down in terms of the percentage of households within these brackets. Now, this 50 to 75,000 is an important number. That's your highest bracket there. Typically, when you look at housing in particular, banks will tell you that 2 to 3 times your annual salary is what you can afford. So when we're looking at new houses being created, the average new house you could probably afford in this area probably about 150 to 170,000. The bad news is, in Michigan, it costs almost $200,000 to build a house right now, about 1,500 square feet, which is about average. This is not unique to Manistee. We're seeing this all over Michigan. Frankly, we're seeing it all over the country. I do work in Arkansas and in Alabama, and we're seeing some of those same issues. We're seeing less and less skilled trades, which is driving up the cost, which means all the cost of housing goes up. So we're going to see a gap in terms, and I know that the housing study is going to go into more detail on this, but what we're seeing is a gap between, you know, what the market can afford and what the market costs to build. So we're going to really need to be creative about how we see housing in the future. The good news is downtowns are a hotter market. We're seeing that, you know, being able to make up for some of that, and we'll talk about that more here in just a second. Your workforce, you actually have a pretty educated workforce. You got 24% of your workforce having a bachelor's grad or professional degree. In Michigan, that tends to average a little bit lower, so you're a little bit higher there in terms of the average. Some other communities I will tell you that we worked in where that number is more like 8%, and that's really tough. That's tough economics to do. The nice part about having a high quality of life is that we're seeing, especially with younger generations, more and more remote working and or not necessarily consulting, but independent contracting. So you're seeing more and more of that. Matter of fact, I read an article about 6 months ago that said by 2025 that 50% of the workforce will be independent contractors. So you're seeing this ability to be more mobile than we ever have. So having broadband internet's important about all that stuff. So, but that also gives you the ability by having a high quality of life to be able to attract a higher education rate as well. Looking at where your folks are employed, what's really interesting, and this is for the city only, so this isn't the region, this is just the city limits. Your number one employment sector is sales and related activities. And then you're looking at office support after that. So you're looking at, you know, not stuff I think would be typical if I were to poll the folks in the room to say, you know, where do you think most people work at who live in the city? But that's what we're looking at. So that's some interesting data. Average housing values, again, I'm starting to see folks not off, so I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker. Your average housing value is lower within the city than it is in the Out County. You know, there's a number of factors to that as well, I believe. Still lower than the state. Here's a really pretty pie chart here. Kind of gives you a breakdown where those numbers are. You have the largest amount in that 100 to 150, which makes a lot of sense when we look at the largest amount in terms of household income. The challenge is going to be how do you create more housing within that bracket when that affordability is not there to create it. So that'll be, again, the housing study I know will address some of that issue, so I'm not going to go a whole lot into that. So the strategy process itself, and again, many of you were at that meeting. I thought this was a really, really good meeting. We do a lot of these all over the state and even the country. What I thought was really great was this identification of what you guys all see, the community as a recognition. And a lot of times when we work with communities, people don't understand, they don't see the forest for the trees sometimes, no pun intended. But the fact that you guys have an abundant amount of natural resources, whether it's the Manistee National Forest, whether it's the river, whether it's the lake, or lakes, I should say, because you have Manistee Lake as well, that is far and away your biggest resource, and I would agree wholeheartedly with that. I love that the Ramsdale and Vogue were high on that list as well. Of course, it was essentially here and then everybody else at this point between natural resources. But again, having an airport is important, having a historic downtown, the Riverwalk, I think there's a recognition of the assets that you have. On the weaknesses side, and this is something that again, I would agree with, lack of community collaboration is number one on the list. And for, I will tell you, for a public meeting, and a well-attended public meeting at that, we had, how many people we showed up for that? 85, 90 people? 85? Let's go with 90, 90 something. There was hundreds of people there. But the idea that the general public picks up on a lack of coordination, that takes a special amount of lack of coordination to get to that level. But I think that there's a recognition that there is, it's a small town, people talk, right? I mean, people know that, if there is bickering going on. And I think that's been apparent. But I agree that that's an issue. But the good news is you guys have probably more in terms of resources, and I don't mean necessarily financial, but I mean stuff. You have more assets as a community that allow other communities. And it's nice that you guys have all those things, but again, in order to maximize those, you have to have better collaboration. I think the vacant storefronts, one of the really difficult things about your community is you have a downtown that's much bigger than the population that you have. I would say the only one that's, in my opinion, probably larger in a scale sense to that population is in County Mat. If you're in County Mat, it was at one point 50,000 people, it's now 915, where you've got blocks and blocks and blocks of just empty buildings. You've got a similar situation. I think your retail overall has been way overbuilt, and I mean that going out into the townships. I think you guys have way more square footage than you necessarily have retail demand for. But that puts more of a pressure on doing stuff downtown, I think, than anywhere else. Having a lack of vision, I think, is obviously a big thing. I think that goes along with community collaboration, and then lack of available low-income housing. Again, you have lower incomes, so you need to be able to provide that type of housing as part of those. It's not necessarily just getting a lot of high-paying jobs and high net wealth people to move here, but it's making sure that you've got quality housing for everybody. You want to get in a position where Traverse City, I think many folks are aware of what's going on in Traverse City, is that they've got so much income coming in there and so much housing is that being eaten up by high income, is that the people who actually live, work in Traverse City, especially in the service industry, are having to move farther and farther out because they simply just can't afford to live within the town. So I think that's an important aspect as we look at Manistee. Opportunities, again, affordable housing. I know there's a project or two that's been proposed. Small business development. I was really thrilled to see this high on the list as well. I'm a big proponent of growing your own first before you go out and attract national chains. Growing your own businesses helps create local wealth. Attracting a retail chain only takes away wealth. One of the studies that I read recently over the last couple of years was 25% more of every dollar, even if it's the exact same item, stays local if you buy from a local business versus a chain business. So if it's a toothbrush, 25 cents of that toothbrush stays local versus a national chain that say like Rite Aid. The reason being is that local businesses hire other local businesses. And now I've yet to see a Little League team sponsored by Walmart or Gap or any of those folks. Local businesses support locally, and I think that's important. The idea of going after new industries, your county trail system. One of the things I thought was really interesting is the folks that we've talked to who've lived here the longest, when we've asked them to characterize the community, people talked about the salt mines. And that's certainly part of your heritage here. But the folks who've been here more recently think of it as a tourist town. And that's really an interesting dichotomy because, again, depending on your mentality about what kind of things you invest in will really dictate kind of how you see the community. And I thought that was really interesting. But this idea about creating new industry, I thought was really nice. And looking at business incubators, commercial kitchens, those types of things. The downtown storefronts, I think, were really important as well. And we'll look at threats. Typically, drugs is usually number one on the list. A lot of communities we work in, it was number 3 here. Negativity was number 1. People are really negative about negativity. I'll reiterate what I said a few minutes ago. I've seen very few communities have as many assets that Manistee does. But I think there's a lot of
lack of coordination, bickering that goes on that keeps it from going forward. And we're hopeful that as we work with all these organizations that we're able to get to that point. I'm not going to point fingers. I'm not going to say who's done what. As long as I've known this community, there's been issues amongst folks. It goes, and you're not the only ones who go through this. I think it happens here probably a little bit more than other places, but you're certainly not the only ones. But looking at some of your other threats, the lack of affordable housing, drugs, declining population, really, I know declining population is number 4. I would tell you that from an economic development perspective, that's number 1. But that also ties into negativity. So you've got to have a vision to go forward and be able to attract folks from the outside. So let's talk a little about your goals. So the goal setting process, we did not actually do. The goal setting process was actually done during your master plan process. All we do is we go to that. A poor consultant would say we copy and paste. But we actually went over and looked at those very carefully and then retyped them. Thank you for getting the joke. Both of you. But I really did, as we looked at these goals, I thought they're good quality goals. So these are the goals that your city has adopted through the master planning process. To say these are the things that are most important for us. Now, if this is the first time that you've ever read this, how many folks are on the city council for the first time that don't have to raise your hand? That's a But it's important to come back and look at your goals and see what these goals are. So goal number 1, explore new opportunities for assisting downtown as well as supporting opportunities which currently exist. Supporting downtown is goal number 1. Utilizing water resources around the city for economic development, goal number 2. Goal number 3, receive and maintain status as a RC community. Goal number 4, working towards communication and consensus. Goal 5, working with agencies and groups both within the city, outside and those within the city. Goal 6, job creation. Goal 7, placemaking. Goal 8, land use practices for residents to pursue occupations. All of this speaks to everything that we're talking about within this economic development strategy. I couldn't have drafted these goals better myself to fit with what we're doing. I think the city has put forth a big vision within the master plan to do those sorts of things that would go, drop down 9 to 10. But working with other partners and doing a GIS database is important. Your regional economic development goals. From a regional standpoint, you're what's called Region 2. How many folks are familiar with Region 2? Wow, that's like 10 more people than I expected. Usually it's nobody in the room. So Region 2, the state has actually divvied up the state into 10 regions. So you basically come down this way and go over this. So it's all Northwest Michigan. But the goals are around education, economic development, workforce, healthcare, tourism and natural resources, agricultural and food systems, and infrastructure goals. Again, all things I think are terribly relevant as we talk about the economic development strategy, but I think, again, your local goals are a little bit better than that. Again, the way this ties into your other planning documents, you have a master plan. I know people are getting really excited because I'm talking master plan stuff because people really get pumped up about it. Almost as much as data. But this idea that all this stuff is supposed to work together, and that's the thing that as residents know this. So let's talk about strategic objectives. Let's talk about what is it that we actually want to do with this strategic plan. Number 1, talent. Population recruitment is your number 1 issue. You need more people who live here full-time. Having seasonal residents is nice, but you need more people who are living here full-time. You need more kids in your schools. It directly ties to absolutely everything that happens in your community. Just recently, I know the hospital announced that they've closed the, what I can't remember. OB. Yeah, so they closed the OB office. Why? Because they didn't have enough people. You need to have more people at the end of the day. That will translate to retail opportunities. I know that Filer Township did a retail analysis that is showing $8.1 million of retail growth within the area. And even though I know it's Filer Township study, we did see very similar numbers for downtown. It's almost exactly the same as the regions to region. Whether it's Filer Township or it's Manistee, it's all the same market. So there is growth potential there, but if you really, $8.1 million is not that much in the grand scheme of things. I know that sounds really weird to say, because if somebody gave me $8.1 million, I would not be here right now. But from a macroeconomic standpoint, though, that's not much. And so in order, if you want to grow those opportunities, if you want to fill storefronts downtown, if you want to even fill storefronts out in the township areas, you've got to have more people. And so looking at how we do that is got to be number 1. But selling down on what you have. So the thing that's your competitive advantage is your low cost of living and high quality of life. There's almost nobody talking about what that means for your community right now. CVB is the closest thing to it, and they're selling it to tourists, and that's great because that's part of our economic development as well. Is we want to bring in tourists. What we want to do is we want to convert the tourists to residents. It's not just come here; it's come here and stay here. Because if this is a growing area, your houses are worth more, your businesses are worth more. This is about growing that wealth. So part of that is that population recruitment. On the industry side, even on the talent side, I know there's workforce development things that we could be talking about, but far and away, if you do nothing else in the next 12 to 24 months, you have to sell your community as a place to live. And by the way, I'd also be reaching out to the realtors on all this stuff and talking with them. So it's how do you convert those folks who are secondary homeowners into primary homeowners? Is selling them on why they want to be here full time. So on the industry side, one of the things that the community needs to do is that you have to actively market your industry sites. I know this sounds kind of relatively basic, and it is relatively basic, but it's also the number one thing almost every community overlooks. Is you have industrial property available, get it up on websites, make sure you're marketing it. I know that the city and the chamber are working on this partnership, and that's one of the things that we've talked about already with the chamber. They're working on it currently and putting it together. But getting that information out there, you cannot sell what the customer doesn't know you have. So it's important to do that. The next part of this is a vertical cluster strategy. That sounds really fancy, but what all it is talking to the existing employers and finding out who has suppliers and or customers that can benefit from being closer to them. So that's looking up and down that kind of the food chain of each one of these industries. The manufacturers council, the fact that you guys have a manufacturers council of all these local manufacturers who get together and talk on a regular basis is awesome. It is really important that the industry talks to one another so they can jointly talk about one of those things that are issues to them. I guarantee you, having talked to a number of these folks, if you were to go ask them, every single one, they can't find employees. What does that go back to? Scroll back up. Population recruitment. It all goes back to population recruitment. So the fact that you got the manufacturer council is important. On the tourism side, one of the things we had really productive conversations with the executive director of the CVB. One of the things I really liked looking at the strategic plans of that organization was their emphasis on growing the summertime group, the weekends, because everyone, I know how much people love, especially full-time residents, love to deal with the summertime crowd. But they make the registers ring, for one. But two is working on how do you increase midweek, and then really what you really need to make your downtown successful in particular is success in the shoulder seasons. So how do you get people here in April, in May, in September, in October, and in November? How do we extend those seasons? And so your Convention and Visitors Bureau is actually already working on that, which I thought was a really proactive thing on their part. When it comes to place housing, again, if we're going to attract people, we've got to have somewhere to put them. So it's not just large tracts of land. And again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about housing. So there's a housing study coming up, but activating upper floors in our downtown. One, that's a really hot property right now. That's where we're looking at millennials and Gen Zs, even boomers. We are seeing 88% of millennials, as an example, want to live somewhere that they can walk everywhere. They want to be able to go to dinner and have a drink and not worry about getting behind the wheel. Boomers are looking to be able to go have a full day and not have to get in the car. As we're starting to see, as boomers get older and older, their ability to drive gets less and less. So having somewhere that they can live and be able to walk to and have a full day is really important. Being able to track millennials is important. Being able to track, we're not a Gen X, so nobody thinks about us ever. But there's like 7 Xers in the room, we're not yet. But this idea around, creating this place that, I got news for you, Xers, and even when Gen Z gets to this point, they're all going to want this. And we're seeing it, it's a trend. People are understanding, especially millennials. I think this ties to also your competitive advantage of the environment. This generation, regardless of political affiliation, puts more emphasis on the environment than any other generation before. So the ability to have walkable places, to be able to go out and go kayak, means more to the millennials and Gen Zs than it does to the Xers and the boomers and the greatest generation before them. That's your competitive advantage. That's one of the things, but you've got to be able to have the product that they want. So upper floors are part of it. There's also going to be more housing again. I'll defer on that, but downtown is really, really important because it's that center place. And I will tell you, I've done industrial recruitment in my past, And the first place that any industry wants to see is downtown, because that's the barometer of the health of your community. Your downtown's it. That's how they tell whether or not you've got a good community. We've seen communities, we've seen projects where industry or manufacturers have selected their site based on the quality of the downtown because that's where the owner wanted to live. It's where they could see them and their spouse and their families be able to live. So that's important. But when it comes to specific projects here, I know West Shore Community College has considered, or I don't know where they are in the process. I can say that. Okay, so they've approved it. I got to dance around it as a consultant. I get information sometimes before the folks do. But getting them downtown is important. This is not a group that spends a ton of money, but getting people downtown is important. There are two things that attract people more than anything else. One is water. You guys know that. You guys live in Manistee. That's why you're probably why you're here. You like water. But having a river downtown is important. The other thing that attracts people is people. So the more people you can get down here, not just for festivals and events, but on a daily basis, the better off you're going to be. Facade improvements are really important. Making sure that we're maintaining those buildings and doing it in a quality way. Not putting vinyl siding up, not putting T111, if you're familiar with that term. It's ugly stuff on top of a facade. But having a historically appropriate facade. You guys have your entire downtown district is a historic district. You have access to tax credits. You can do things that other downtowns can't. So having part of that be a part of that. That ties into the next part, which is working with realtors on doing developers on doing more projects downtown. Rehab projects in particular, but anything that kind of adds density and adds housing to the downtown area. Business improvement trainings, so working with the existing businesses. I think way too often communities put more emphasis on attracting new businesses than they do retention. Number one rule in sales is keeping a customer is way cheaper than getting a new one. So we should be working with our existing businesses, helping make them successful, helping them expand, and then worry about the next ones. So the next one is recruit more companies. But it's the order. Work with the existing ones first, and then work with the other ones. So as part of this packet, we'll actually be providing a lot of market data. Again, I know Farley Township recently got something, but our data is very similar, and we'll be providing that to the community as well. And then looking at your marina upgrades and dock replacement, and having that marina is important. Does anybody think downtown has a parking issue? Every community I deal with thinks that they have a parking issue. Honestly, I haven't seen it. Even in the summertime, I haven't seen a ton of it. But any opportunity that you have to be able to have an alternative way of people getting downtown, you want to take. Your marina is not only one of those ways people can get downtown, but it's also an attraction. I'm sure if I were to ask everybody in this room, how many people have gone along, just walked around the river walk and looked at the boats that were moored? I don't know if that's the right term. But I think just about everybody in the community at some point or another has done that. So it's also an attraction. So making sure that you're maintaining that investment in that public infrastructure. Again, developer recruitment, I think, is a part of that. Entrepreneurship, going through entrepreneurship trainings, I think, is important. So helping people who have an idea about a business. Folks, there are so many ways for people to be able to engage in small business development at this point. I mean, had we had Etsy 30 years ago, Lord knows what we'd have today from an economic standpoint. Online selling is an incredible opportunity for anybody to live anywhere and do anything. We have creative people in every community in the country. The idea of helping people to expand their businesses, whether it's industry, whether it's making bracelets, I don't care where in that spectrum you are, not that bracelets are blessed or anything else, but this idea of if you make something, or if you have an idea for a business, to be able to help do that, because again, helping create that local wealth is important. When we talk about implementation partners, I want to talk a little bit about kind of who's all at the table. And this is important because obviously the city is a big part of this, the county is a big part of this, but you have a Downtown Development Authority, you have a Chamber of Commerce, and you have the CVB, Convention and Visitors Bureau. It's not the city, it's the county area. I know, I got the name wrong. Everywhere else it's called Convention and Visitors Bureau. Here it's a little bit different, and we'll change that in the actual report. But we've talked about creating this thing called either Team Manistee, and we're also tweaking the name a little bit. I've heard Manistee Forward. That may ultimately be the name. It matters not the name, and what matters is what you do with it. And what we really wanted to do was to say, you know what, with all 5 of these areas, economic development is a pretty big table to be at. It's not just this idea around industry anymore. So you really have to have more coordination in terms of who's doing what. And what we really want to focus on were the three organizations in particular, with the Chamber, the DDA, and the Convention and Visitors Bureau, or the County Visitors Bureau, on who does what. And really what we wanted to focus on was what are each of those organizations' core strengths. And we'll look at the Chamber, the industry relationships, their business sector leadership, their business education, and traditional economic development really kind of fits square with their organizational strengths. When we look at the Downtown Development Authority, you know, even the history of DDAs were placemaking before placemaking was a term or was cool. The fact that they do a number of festivals and events, and just working with the downtown retailers and downtown building owners is really important. And we look at the County Visitors Bureau, tourism and marketing. They really are the marketing experts within our community. Their job is to sell the community every day to people who don't live here. It's, I think, one thing when you live here and you kind of know where everything is, but if you're not familiar with Manistee or Manistee County, it's really important that you understand the role that these folks play. I think their job as marketing experts is not to be undersold. When we look at these types of projects, who should be doing what? And what we talk about is we talk about leads on this stuff. So there's going to be a need for partnership with support. It's going to require these organizations to, part of this is understanding kind of what lane everyone's supposed to be in. Because I think what happens over time, because we use the term economic development, and it means a lot of different things. And so people think they mean something and they mean something else, and somebody thinks it means something else. And you get wires crossed, you get people stepping on each other's toes because they're calling something else something different. What we just said is, these areas, we think that the Chamber should be the leader in industry retention and recruitment and entrepreneurship, which are things that they're already working with the city on. But I think it also be population attraction, which is the first time, by the way, the city hasn't necessarily heard this before, I think yesterday or a couple of days ago. So I'm not saying that you guys have the resources, financial resources to do this stuff yet, but this idea that this is who should be leading it. And then they should be supporting on placemaking and real estate development. So this idea that there's potential to partner with the Downtown Development Authority on some of these things. The Downtown Development Authority should be the lead on placemaking. They know placemaking. This is what DDAs have done since their inception back in 1979. They should also be supporting entrepreneurship, because they are not only they're a place, but they're a home of entrepreneurs. So being able to help that, as well as, frankly, folks, downtown is a tourism destination for every community, but especially here in Manistee. And again, they can be a factor in helping sell the community and population attraction. And then we look at the County Visitors Bureau. They're certainly the lead in tourism marketing, and they can also help support the population attraction. The key about working with the CDB is, if you've ever seen the CDB materials, is that they have some amazing photography. And I think using some of those assets, because the same reason people would want to move here are the same reason why people would want to come vacation here. It's this idea that you're close to the lake, that you're close to nature, you've got a historic downtown, you've got all these things to sell, and the CDB is already selling it. So we can be using that expertise and using potentially some of those assets to help with creating this talent attraction process. So again, whether that's called Team Manistee or Manistee Forward, frankly, I don't care. But the idea is that everyone works together and pulls in that same kind of direction. And we talked a little bit about this is the implementation plan, but I want to go a whole lot into depth, because I think some of this stuff is we're still finalizing who's going to be lead on some specifics. But it's the idea that we're looking at, all right, who's doing all this stuff, how does it tie to our goals, and who is going to be the partner, and what's our long term. So the idea here is that we're looking at short, mid, and long-term goals. So really, this builds around learning to crawl before you walk, learning to walk before you run. So we're, as we've structured this into the implementation plan, we looked at, what do you need to do before you can do, what projects need to come before the other before you can do this stuff. So it's really important that we realize that, some of the larger stuff necessarily, like bringing in brand new developers, may not be the first thing you do, but you might need to be able to put together marketing packages for properties first. Because it's hard to attract a developer if you don't have marketing packages put together. So, when we structured this strategy, we really thought about the capacity of what's here and the need for coordination and the need for the community telling its story. And in the end, I'm very happy with this strategy, but I'm happy to also take a few minutes here to answer some questions if folks have questions. Yes, sir.
Joe, under your SWOT analysis, one of the threats you said was real Manistee.
I did not say that, for one.
Okay.
What we did was I'll bring it up. I did not. So the thing about the public meeting was that these were the responses of the public. So the rules were that if you come to the meeting, if you suggest something, there is no wrong answer. But everyone got a chance to vote on whatever people said. So if it went on the board, somebody in the room yelled it out. If it got votes, it's because people put votes on there. So this was all the public input process. That's it. You don't think you'll see real Manistee anywhere else than anything else that we have on here, other than it was brought in the public meeting. That's it. Yes.
I have a question about, you mentioned Filer Township, and I know that they're working on their strategies, but I noticed they weren't really part of the team per se. You know, how do you see these parallel, you know, we're both trying to grow the township and the city, and there's been a lack of collaboration. Is there a way to bridge that?
I think there probably is. It'll probably be along the lines of housing.
Okay.
So part of the issue, and this was a conversation I've had with a couple of DDA board members too, because that was a concern that, you know, that, as a matter of fact, I think that there's been some proactive overture about partnering on some opportunities between the two. I'm hesitant between townships and cities on DDAs working together on retail recruitment as an example, because there's typically a winner and a loser on that.
Right.
And when we look at that retail market, you know, feasibility, it's essentially the same market when we look at those two type DDAs. So I'm hesitant on that. But the idea around growing the pie of growing housing, I think is important, because that is something that everyone would benefit from. So I think that would probably be the area which I would encourage the most collaboration on. I would be just hesitant on that retail side, because again, the township specializes in, if you look at kind of the way things have developed, locally owned businesses are in downtown, chains are out in the township, and you know, townships, chains, I don't want to conflate the two. But chains, you know, have certain thresholds that they look for before they come into a community. A small business owner has a gut feeling in the pit of their stomach that this is a good idea to do.
Right.
And I think that your competitive advantage is that, you know, they're going to look at numbers, but for a chain, they are much more formulaic in saying this is what we're going to look at. So, but they're also formulaic on the other side, as you've seen with Kmart. Is that if that doesn't meet their formula, gone they go.
Right.
But downtown business owners are much, independent business owners are much different.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. I didn't want to get into too much detail because I didn't want folks to say, oh, so many things. So the question was whether or not we can talk a little bit more about the implementation plan. I will give you the caution that this is still a little bit in flux. That's why I didn't spend a lot of time on it. But this idea around the implementation plan. So the implementation plan, actually, when I talked about, you know, what prioritizes, you know, talent as an example, create an ongoing population recruitment campaign. Medium term, I think that there are some things you can still do in the shorter term, but this idea of who's responsible for what as you go forward on this. And then looking at industry, you know, maybe promoting available industry spaces, but short term, collecting information on all available industries. So this is kind of how it maps out. So each one of these areas that we talked about, we put it in a little bit more concise way to be able to say, all right, here's how we tie it to the goals, here's how we tie it to, you know, who's going to be the lead on this stuff, and then change responsible to lead, and then who's partnering with it, what's the time frame. Does that make sense? Yes?
I have an observation after being here many years, and it's the taxes. Did anybody address the taxes? When we talk about affordable housing, a lot of people move out of the city because the taxes are so high. And especially if you're not, you have a big seasonal residency and they're not homesteaded, so they don't feel like they get the value.
High taxes showed up on the threats. It showed up, I think there were 5 on that. Honestly, and there's very little on the tax side, especially if you were to ask, and the city management's not here, where's the city assessor. But I think what we've seen across the board in Michigan is that when the financial downturn and the Great Recession happened from 06 to 012, property values went down, And when those property values went down, now that the economy's recovered for a good portion of that, the way Michigan state tax law works is that it never contemplated, it never thought that that would ever happen. I mean, if you think about that, up until 2006, never in the history of, in the 20th century outside the Great Depression, has that happened. So the assumption was that property taxes would always go up. So we created the Headley Act. So the Headley Act says that your taxes can only go up at the rate of inflation or 5%, whatever is less. And what happened in 2012 is we hit the floor, dug a hole, and now we're still down that hole. And because of the Headley Amendment, our property values are still relatively low because, again, the state law says it can only go up. So even though our housing values are back up here, the taxation level is still lower than it was in 2006.
Joe, just a point of clarification, that's
Sure.
not Headley, that was Proposal A.
Proposal
Back
A,
from
sorry.
90, you're right. Headley was prior to that.
You're right. I apologize. You're right. It was proposal A.
It's still an issue though, even if it's been adjusted, it's still an issue.
She's referring to millage rates.
Right.
Village rates, yeah.
Well, I guess part of that then goes to, the economic development strategy doesn't contemplate that because that's not necessarily within the role of economic development. That's a city management issue. And frankly, I would probably look at, from a citizen standpoint, what is it that you're getting charged millage rates for, and what services are you getting for it? I mean, I think there's a basic level of government there that, this assumes blocking and tackling of government, that you can do those things before you do other things. Was there somebody raised their hand, raised their hand in the back?
I have a question. I'm just curious, this information, has this been presented to like the DDA and the chamber and the city council? Are they all on the same page with this?
We've done a preliminary presentation a month ago, talking about these projects. The document itself, the city received about 2 weeks ago, and several members have saw that I've seen in the last couple of days. So this is the first public unveiling of this document.
Can you go down to the slide where you have the three organizations? Oops. Okay, now, scroll up just a little bit. The last paragraph in there, in the copy,
Yes.
Team Manistee.
Yes.
Can you zoom in on that a little bit? My eyes
Sure.
aren't quite good. Okay. About the middle there, you put it bluntly, there is and still remains a lack of trust among some of these leaders.
Yes.
I think that's a key point of this entire thing. I think we've had too many of our groups working against, I'm not going to say necessarily against each other, but within their own sphere, which is not necessarily inclusive of other spheres. How do you suggest that we address the lack of trust among leadership of many of these different organizations?
That's an excellent question. The first thing that we've said on that is there needs to be a monthly meeting of the leadership of these organizations. So what I mean by that, I mean the chair and the highest professional staff. So in the city's case, it would be the mayor and the city manager. In the DDA's case, it would be the board chair and the DDA director. So it would be those two people that would be on a monthly basis. The only way that I think you're going to start to bridge that trust issue is the open sharing of information. And that is not an overnight process. But the idea of, and what's the commonness behind that? The commonness behind that is, it's Manistee. What are we working on that's going to be the betterment of Manistee? So it would be individual projects, it would be festivals and events, but it would be that beginning of that sharing of information. And I think that's how, building trust takes a second to destroy and a lifetime to build. But I think that's the only way you're going to get to it is by sharing information.
Thank you.
Yes.
To answer that, it would seem that if there were an event that each of those three entities could agree on would be beneficial to everybody, that would be something that would bring them together. Let's say you have a cycling event that also had a tourism expo attached to it. So each business could, after the biking event, show potential newcomers to the community, people who would buy in what you have. Everybody would have a share in that.
Well, there is, I mean, there certainly are opportunities to do collaborative marketing as part of that too. I think you can do, in Lansing and East Lansing as an example, when there's a big festival or event, particularly if there's a convention, you know, if there's a big group coming, in your case, we'll use this example, use a cycling event, is that in particular, like the Convention Visitors Bureau is the lead on this, where you'll go downtown and there'll be signs in the storefronts that say, hey, welcome to the Manistee cycling event, you know, participants. And you can even work with the downtown retailers or any of the businesses, frankly, and offering discounts, you know, to put people from those events. So like a 10% off or free appetizer or whatever it is that you could potentially do to collaboratively market that. But it's important for folks to understand when those are going on and what's going on. I mean, and to do that from a leadership standpoint is important. So I think that would definitely be something that would come up in one of these types of meetings.
Right, and all three could agree that they would each get something out of that, and that, you know,
Sure.
these people.
And I would say that this has to be one of them. I think that there are several ways that you can do that together.
Right, the
Absolutely.
beauty of the cycling event, to take this a step further, is that the cyclists can actually go through, you can channel them through parts of your community to actually show them while they're riding exactly what you're selling.
I don't disagree with that. I think it'd be a good idea.
So, anyway.
Yes.
Speaking of conventions, did you discuss this in your groups, the fact that we have no real focus on conventions in Manistee and no real source?
I'm hesitant on, because what the next question then comes is where would you put them?
Right.
And that leads to the idea of a convention center. I don't think you need that, frankly. I think you guys have enough assets, and I think convention centers are very hard to make money. I think if you talk to almost all the convention centers in the state, that they struggle, you know, with the exception of maybe Coble Hall, but then you know, there's some heavy subsidy that goes along with a lot of convention centers. So I would be hesitant to suggest a convention center particularly, but you know, you've got things like the Ramsdale Inn. I mean, we've held, personally, I've held stuff here in Manistee through other positions I've held. We've held downtown conferences, we've done stuff here. And there's enough spaces of a certain size to do some things. But if you're looking at a boat show or anything like that, I mean, you simply don't have the space, nor would I necessarily think you need it. I think it just becomes.
I was thinking more on the scale of using the things like the Ramsdale and other smaller venues to develop that, because again, not everyone has 5,000 people coming to an event.
Right.
There's a lot of conventions.
And you certainly can do that. I think, you know, I'm quite sure the CVB is working on that, because that's one of those things that you can use on the shoulder seasons in particular. That's why you see a lot of conferences in September and October, as well as, you know, March and April and May, because that's the area, those are the times where you can get really good deals too with hotels. So that's really one of the reasons why you see those conferences and those things happen on those days. I know we're running close on time here. We want to keep it within the hour. Any last burning questions anybody has? Yes.
The implementation of this going forward, who owns this? Particularly, God forbid, when Lizette leaves, who manages the implementation of this plan?
So this is the city's economic development strategy. So what we would ask is that not only the city, but each of the organizations that we've mentioned in this strategy all pass resolutions of adopting this as the economic development strategy. So it's essentially the city's lead, but we would like all the organizations who've been mentioned on this to pass resolutions saying, yeah, we agree with this, because what we don't want to have happen is to get 12, 18, 24 months down the road and have the chamber come back, and the chamber won't do this, so that's what we're going to do. But they come back and say, well, we never agreed to do that. So we want everybody on board, but this is the city's economic development strategy.
Is there a time on that before the end of the year?
For them to adopt it, we would suggest probably, there is no direct timeline, but we would suggest as soon as possible.
I would also like to add, I think it connects to your question earlier, to just give some background. So the way that this has worked so far is, so I'm here full-time for this year, who have been like, you know, trying to work with the people and steering the projects, but at the same time, there's the steering committee, so it's a group that's conformed of all, you know, the DDA, the city, there's subcommittees that also work with us in all of this stuff, so it has the County Visitors Bureau, your largest employers. So we've so far tried to keep everyone on the same page. The other thing about all of this is that once that all of this is finalized, it will also be available publicly. So if you go into the Michigan Rising Tide website. You can download the economic development strategy and look at all
I
of those.
would highly encourage it to be on the city website.
Yeah. No, but I mean in general, like all of the work as part of the Rising Tide initiative here at Manistee, so the branding, the city, everything would also be available publicly. So the whole hope of all of this is that once we finalize it and tweak it, everyone will adopt it moving forward.
Do you want to plug the branding meeting coming up?
Oh, yes. Sorry, before I forget, thank you for that. So the other thing about the Rising Tide, like I mentioned earlier, was it's the branding and marketing. So it's kind of an initiative similar to this one, but to redo a little bit of the image of Manistee. You know, it's been a retiring community for a long time. How do we connect with that younger crowd? How do we change the logo of our city? How do we have wayfinding so that I know when I'm on 31 where I'm at? So as part of Rising Tide, we've also partnered with Arnett and Muldrow Associates. So he came here sometime in April, I think, and we were all together, and we did some focus groups to kind of look at the image and the logo and the whole thing of Manistee. So we're going to do a branding reveal, which will be kind of a toolbox available for the city with a new logo and an image for the whole community. There's going to be logos for the private owners, the local organizations like the Downtown Development Authority, the Chamber of Commerce, and all of that will be available to everyone. I'm still working on the location of that meeting, but if you want to put it in your calendars, it'll be on August 1st from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. I will put it in the newspaper, put it at the Rising Tide, social media and everything, but if you want to get it in your calendars ahead of time, that'll also be good.
We've done a significant amount of work with Arnett and Muldrow. I've actually seen some of the stuff already.
Yeah.
I think it was.
It looks pretty cool. So, and before we leave, I know we're pretty short on time, and I know everyone is going to have questions even after we publish the economic development strategy. If you have questions or if you want to, get a thought and idea connected to Joe, feel free to email me, contact me, and I will be happy to try to get you the answers you need. I know she has a question.
Yes.
I just wonder how you make the city, how do you improve city accountability? Because we've had, the master plan I don't feel like is executed in a proper way that we've spent thousands of dollars on previously. So how do we as citizens push that? Because I feel like they just ignore the issues. And we have blight issues, we have trash issues, we have riverwalk issues, we have population issues, and they're just kind of like, yeah.
We live in an awesome system. We really do. I honestly, the way you have accountability is that you show up to meetings and you keep bringing it up and you bring it up and you bring it up, and then if that's not addressing it, then run for office.
We hear the term "they" frequently. They is us, and we only have limited resources. And in the process of those limited resources, we have to work together to get the most bang out of whatever we put in that pool. And I'm here to tell you that the governmental organizations right now, in my life here, which has been my entire life, I don't ever remember them seeing working together to better together than they are today. And we have an intergovernmental. This is nothing more than a tool to help us reflect on some obvious things. It's up to us, not they, to implement and work together to move the community forward.
I've only been to a couple of meetings, I don't want to get going on this, but it was on the deer issue. And there was tons of people in this audience that were for not spending the money for calling deer. And they voted to call the deer. So I don't think they're listening to us. They are not listening to us as citizens of the city. And that was just one meeting, and I haven't been to too many, but if that's an example of us and them, or us and they, it just doesn't seem that they're listening to what we're saying. So that's just.
Well, thank you everybody for, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, well, it got pretty heated for a minute, so if you guys could talk later, I can encourage that. But other than that, thank you for coming again. If you have questions, any